Thank you guys for coming. My name is Xavier Bickett. I'm the chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus. And I thought it was very important to meet with the governor candidates and really find out, get to know them better, where they stand on liberty issues. So within the Republican Party, we're a very diverse group of ideas, ranging from social conservatives, moderates, business Republicans, and even libertarian Republicans. But the most important thing for the Republican Liberty Caucus is we are Republicans first. But we do believe in individual markets, individual liberty, free markets, and a limited scope of government not infringing on the lives of other people. So we're going to learn a little bit from the candidates today where they stand on a lot of those issues. Some of them will be difficult questions. And I've given some topics to them ahead of time to do a little bit of research, but also give them some time to prepare as well. You may see this wonderful sign shown throughout the debate. We're going to have some yes-no questions. So if you see something different or something, good opportunity to find out why one of the candidates may be different than another person. When we get started, we're going to start with just an introduction from you guys. We'll do a 2-minute introduction. Charity, the timekeeper, and why don't we just start with you, Keith, and then go down from there. And everyone.
All right, maybe I'll stand. Is that okay? Yeah. IT support. Thank you, Xavier. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'll just give you a quick snapshot of me and why I'm running. I've had the chance now these last just 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I guess, since getting in the race to talk to a lot of people. And I think what continues to come out to me is that we're a good state and we have really good people. And yet there is this failure to thrive in Minnesota right now. And if you ask people whether or not they're concerned that their kids are going to stay in Minnesota, if you ask people whether they're concerned that maybe even their parents are going to stay in Minnesota, and if you ask them, have you ever thought about whether you can stay in Minnesota, the light bulbs start turning on and everybody has a sense that, yeah, this has been a really great place, but are we living in this wonderful legacy that we have? Is it going to continue? It's not a birthright. We have to keep earning it. And so you look at the trend lines in terms of us being a net out-migration state in terms of native-born people. We're an out-migration state for businesses, for wealth, for capital. You look at job creation in our state, and a huge chunk of it now is in social services and education, and you realize that many of the fundamentals in Minnesota that were there for us are in decline. And so I think about how I was raised with that good old Minnesota ethic, that you tell the truth and you take responsibility for your actions, that you get a good education and you work hard, you take care of your family, you love God and your neighbor, and you give back to your community. And you realize that for the last 8 years under Barack Obama and Mark Dayton, we've been hearing that the American dream, the new ethic for us here, is that we should get a part-time minimum wage job, maybe a couple, and depend on the government for our health care and our education and our home heating oil and our transportation and all of these things. And I think people fundamentally understand that that is not the American dream. It's what we've been sold. And so I'm running to make Minnesota work for everyone again and to get back to that tried and true Minnesota ethic that we all know and trust and love. And I think we can do it, but it's a tough business, so we got to knuckle down and get the job done.
We'll just go straight on down.
And just for my friends here, she's making hand signals, so she's not ordering. She's giving you your times down here in the corner. So, hi, I'm Senator Dave Osmek, and I was born in a little town called Glencoe, Minnesota. I went home to my parents' farm in Biskie, where the largest commercial enterprise is the liquor store. And I spent the first 18 years of my life there, and then I've eventually moved here to metropolitan area and to Mound, where I live with my wife and my 2 daughters. And I decided to jump in this race for one reason really only. We need a fighter. We need a fighter for our values. And our values are really Minnesota's values. They are you get up in the morning, that life doesn't come to you, you go out and get it, that you work for a living, that you raise your family, that you have that your kids can get a good education and not be indoctrinated, that you have roads that you can drive on, not a choo-choo train for a couple $1 billion every time we want to build one. You know, it's those types of attitudes that really permeate Minnesota. And that's why I'm really running, is that we have to have somebody that's going to stand up. We have had too much Minnesota nice, as far as I'm concerned, too much Minnesota nice that we should be stomaching anymore as a party. We need to have someone that is a fighter that works for those values. And what am I going to do when I'm governor? Number one, out of the gates, the Met Council is gone. We will take them out by the roots. I already presented the bill this year at the end of session. I actually presented it to the Senate while playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic on my cell phone, bringing it up the aisle to the Secretary of the Senate. And as much as that sounds sort of goofy, it was entertaining as hell to my Senate compatriots because they understand we need liberty. And the Met Council is the anti-liberty organization of all time. Second, we're going to terminate Southwest Light Rail. They just opened the bids, and gee whiz shebang, they came in too high. Well, guess what? We're going to come in higher the next time that they put them out there. This thing is a pit of money that we keep pouring more money into. We're also going to shut down the next line, that Botno line. We're going to shut that down. Lastly, we need to move to zero-based budgeting. We need to have a governor that's going to appoint commissioners that are going to reduce the size of government, reduce the FTEs, the employees, and reduce the actual money we spend. And believe me, if you know me, I'm a fighter that's going to do it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phillip Parrish, and thank you for Xavier and all of you that have worked so hard to put this together tonight. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to take an opportunity to talk to you about freedom, security, and prosperity. So the whole campaign and the team that's working on this is focused every day on protecting your freedoms, making sure we get our security straight in Minnesota, and making sure that you get to prosper from your labors. So I was born in Blue Earth, Minnesota, raised in the Medford, Owatonna area, West Concord. I grew up and graduated from West Concord. I went to school to become a teacher. I taught school for 13 years, and then I became a principal, and I was a principal for over 7, and I specialize in emotional behavioral disorders. In all, I've been in education for over 26 years. In the midst of all that, I joined the Navy as an intelligence specialist. I was called away to duty in 2003, 2005, and then in 2008, I had taken a direct commission to be an intelligence officer, and I was called away in 2008, and I kind of never made it back. I was kind of stuck overseas for quite a while, and then this April made it back here. And so I'm very happy to be home to Minnesota, but wow, am I concerned. So my last set of orders, I'm sitting in D.C. Believe it or not, they deployed me to D.C. I was already overseas, and they deployed me to D.C. How strange is that? I think I might have been better off in Syria, but, you know, I'm not sure. So I'm looking and researching what's going to happen this next election cycle. And obviously, coming into this election cycle we just got done with, a lot of us are very concerned about the ethics and morals of the political machine out there that is shocking all of us. And we should be shocked and we should be angry. So I'm looking and I'm researching, well, who's going to run and what are they going to talk about and are they talking about serious issues? And I couldn't find anybody. No harm to anyone, no insult to anybody that's running now. But the bottom line is I couldn't find anybody telling the truth about what's really going on. So that's what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you the truth and make sure that you all get the truth from me.
Well, thank you. I'm Jeff Johnson. Background on me, my wife and I both spent essentially the first half of our lives in northwestern Minnesota. We've been in Plymouth for the second half of our lives. I've been self-employed for about the last 16 years. During that time, I spent 6 years in the Minnesota House, and now I've also served on the Hennepin County Board for the last 8.5 years as the often lonely voice of reason in the heart of the wilderness of Hennepin County. And I'm running for governor for a really simple reason. To take power away from government and to give it back to the people of Minnesota. Everybody in this room knows what the mantra of government has become. They know best how we should spend our money and live our lives. They know what our health insurance should look like, how we should commute to work, what we can do with our own property, how we should raise our kids. And that will end when I'm governor of Minnesota, because it's none of government's damn business, and it's worth a fight. And I am excited tonight to walk through some of the ways that I'll do that as governor. I'm not going to do it in the intro, because I want to wrap up by talking to you just for a second about winning. Because we can't do any of these things if we don't win. And it's extremely important, if we want to win, that we pick our strongest candidate in 2018. Frank Sinatra used to say, don't try to hide your scars because they make you who you are. I don't try to hide the fact that I lost to Mark Dayton in 2014, and I would argue that running in 2014 is one of the things that makes me stronger than any other candidate in 2018. Whether you look at name recognition, whether you look at the fact that I won with independents by 10% after winning an endorsement and a very difficult primary, or that I raised more money than Mark Dayton, or that I got more votes than any other Republican. I'm proud of the race we ran, but we lost by 5 points. And I learned some lessons from that. I know where I made mistakes, and I'll promise you I never make the same mistake twice. So tonight I'm going to ask that you join me in the fight to put the people in charge again, because that is how we will return opportunity and prosperity to everybody in this state. Thank you.
Just so you guys know, there was a criteria to be on the governor's forum that the RLC board had set, and it had to do with if they have caucused Republicans since 2012, if they had publicly announced that they're running for governor, if they had, what were the other criteria again? I don't remember now. If they were a Republican elected official or an endorsed Republican candidate. And so some candidates didn't meet that criteria. These 4 did, and Matt Dean also did meet the criteria. He let me know he couldn't be here tonight, but I did promise Marge that she'd be able to say a quick piece on his behalf.
Thank you so much. It's quite an honor to be here, and I want to thank everybody for coming. And on behalf of Matt Dean, he is very sad that he was not able to come, but a long time ago he had made a commitment to be up in Crow Wing County. He's actually doing 87 counties in 87 days, and so he is not able to be with us tonight, but does extend his greeting to all of you. He does have a table out there, and there is information about him, and I encourage everybody to stop by his table, get information about him, get to know him, and if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them, and if not, ask Matt directly. But thank you so much for coming.
All right, so why don't we kick off the first question. I did give the candidates a few topics ahead of time. So the first question I want to ask you guys is, being a governor, you're the executor of the state. What executive experience do you have and that qualifies you to be governor, and what's the largest staff you've ever had to manage and the largest budget you've ever personally been responsible for? And for this one, why don't we just start, Keith, and go down? For this one, yeah, 2 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think I'm probably the only candidate, and actually a rarity in politics, who has spent far more time in the private sector, 23 years in business, than in politics, just the last 8 years. And so when we talk about your credibility to serve as not the commander-in-chief, but the CEO perhaps of our state, much of what I bring was honed in the private sector. So I was part of a couple of technology firms. I had people anywhere from 4 or 5 direct reports to actually a staff of over 70 with interim direct reports in between that. When I went into my management consulting practice, the direct team that I managed was 24 people. Our entire practice, I was one of the partners of the firm, was 2,700 people. And then as party chair, after getting out of business and going into politics, we actually had obviously responsibility for the entire budget and all 127 BPOUs, all 8 congressional districts, all of the 13,000 or so delegates that are out there. And that leadership challenge when you're at the state party is very different, because it is not command and control. You don't get just to tell people what to do. You have to build coalitions, and you have to find ways to get stuff done. And it does require that you be a strong leader and be willing to stand up and take the arrows as well. So I feel like my background, this combination of private sector activity and now enough experience in politics, positions me really, really well for the job at hand. And here's why. You have to understand how these big bureaucracies work. I actually was a consultant to state and local governments for 8 years, which is part of what propelled me into politics, seeing how broken and unproductive they were. You have to understand what happens in the legislature and how things get done there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then you have to understand how to be a CEO and actually manage a large enterprise. And so I feel like I bring all of those things. I know where the problems are. I know how to fix them. I've got the will to fix them. I'm willing to stand up to the special interests and all of the entrenched interests down in St. Paul and actually make this thing happen. So that's why I think I'd be qualified. Thank you.
Keith, I don't know if you answered this, but what was the largest budget you'd been directly responsible for?
Well, I guess in the legislature, responsible for, at the time, $35 billion in general fund spending, and overall, it was about $65 billion in all fund spending at the time.
And that was your direct response, like was it for you as a legislature, or was it you directly responsible for that budget?
I sure treated it that way.
Senator Osmek.
Oh, sorry, Keith. I've spent all my life in the private sector. So I have spent every minute of my life. I'm actually a rarity at the state capitol. I actually hold a full-time job with United Health Group. I manage 3 different teams of individuals, 2 in Washington, one team in Washington, 1 here in Minneapolis, or in the Bloomington area, actually, Minnetonka area, and 1 in Lansing, Michigan. So that's my current job, and I've worked over the years, as we all do. We've sort of gravitate through a number of different jobs. One of them, I was a fast food restaurant manager for Rax in St. Cloud. If you're from St. Cloud, you probably remember that place. Burger King, I was a chief assistant manager, so we were responsible for teams and scheduling and that kind of stuff. But my professional life currently is probably where I have the most responsibility. My responsibilities for about 10 people, plus some contractors. Total value of annual contracts is in the range of $3.5 to $4 million per year, and the contracts vary from state delivery systems to a judicial system, as well as serving 145,000 military service personnel and their families through the military health system. So that's what I somewhat do for a living in short. And I am also a current sitting state senator, so I do also take responsibility for the budget and the $46 billion that we currently have in general fund spending, and that is your money, so we have to be very vigilant.
26 staff members, $1.7 million, and a $1.3 million building project was my last fiscal year at Girard Treatment Program's New Dominion School. My work, I'm the non-politician. I'm that guy in the background that essentially you've been training and supervising for 27 years in the education industry and 19 years in the Navy. In my most recent jobs overseas as then Lieutenant Parrish, I was called to do an 04 position as the Joint Chief of Operations, and I was the liaison for the full-time staff and the reserve units coming in and out of Jack Molesworth. So I don't have a quote of that budget, but you can imagine the budget going in and out of about 300 reservists coming in and out of Jack Molesworth, England. It was pretty significant, and my name was on the line for assets that you purchased. So I'm going to be that person in this team, in this growing effort to win this governor's office, that's absolutely committed to making sure your dollars are handled appropriately. I specialize in counterterrorism, but my analyst skills have brought me to a level of expertise that I've often called upon to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse. And one of the things that I plan on doing when I win this, because we are going to win this, is I'm going to make sure that we investigate every crook, cranny, nuance of every single budget and line item in there. And I guarantee you I'm going to find problems, because that's what I do. That's what you trained me to do.
Well, I too have spent more time in the private sector than the public sector, but I will tell you that I'm proud of both. And when the question is executive experience, I've had several smaller executive experiences. I have my own small staff at the county. We've got a budget of a few $100,000, although I'm one of 7 that has thousands of employees and a $2 billion budget. I was chairman of the House Republican Campaign Committee for 2 campaign cycles, and so we had a staff of probably 15 or 20 and about a $1 to $1.5 million budget each of those cycles. When I ran for governor, we had a $2.5 billion budget, and we had 8 or 10 employees. But I think the one thing for me that I believe sets me apart more than anything else when it comes to business experience, I have been an employment and labor lawyer for 25 years now. And while I don't practice anymore, I still have a business on the side where I consult with a lot of businesses. And over those 25 years, I have advised literally hundreds of executives on some extremely difficult and complex business issues. And I've also served on several leadership teams on larger corporations that have been clients of mine to deal both with budgetary issues and those employment and labor law issues. And that has been companies that are mom and pop right up to one of the largest multinational corporations in the country, which is Cargill, where I worked for about 4 or 4.5 years. So I think that is something that probably sets me apart from everyone else in this race.
Thank you. Listen, so we are the Republican Liberty Caucus. We call ourselves the conscience of the Republican Party, and even a lot of libertarians may not always agree what liberty means. What does libertarian means? Where do you draw the line between my liberty and your liberty? So this next question is going to be, what does liberty mean to you? And being able to explain it, I'll give you 2 minutes on this as well. Why don't we start Senator Osmek, and we'll go down and come back here. Yep. Is that good for you guys? Awesome. Thank you. So what does liberty mean to you?
I'm not going to use 2 minutes.
Okay.
This is very simple. Liberty is your freedom to live where you want to, do what you want to do, work where you want to work, spend the money you want to spend, as long as it doesn't impact others or impact others' liberty. That's pretty much it.
Liberty to me is that ability to, we have the choice to screw life up as bad as we want to or get it right. And that's a beautiful part about our Constitution, federal and state, is we have the right to screw it all up or get it straight. And we don't need anybody telling us how to get it right. We don't need anybody monitoring every ounce of our day. We can do that on our own, and that's our right and our liberty to do.
So liberty to me is really very similar to what the senator said. It's kind of that classic John Locke definition that says, liberty is my ability to pursue my own happiness and make my own decisions as long as it doesn't hurt another individual or infringe upon someone else's ability to pursue their own happiness or make their own decisions. And the difficulty in all this is we are going to come to different conclusions on certain issues as to what might hurt someone else or infringe upon their ability to make their own decisions. And a few of those things are going to come up tonight. I can almost guarantee it. There's probably a couple big things and a couple small things where some of you aren't going to agree with everything I say or a decision I make based upon that definition. But when we get to those, I just ask that you keep a couple things in mind about me when it comes to the question of liberty. Number one, I hope you appreciate that I am always really upfront and honest. I never hide the ball with anybody, regardless of whether you agree with me or not. And I will never, ever dance around an issue, as we often do in politics, in order to make you wonder whether I maybe really agree with you or not, but you're not quite sure. That's never going to happen with me, and I hope you appreciate that, even when we disagree on some important issues. The other piece that I'd like to add to that is I hope that you all recall that when I was a leader within the party, I was one of the few who was very open and encouraging of bringing in what I would call liberty-minded delegates and, frankly, Ron Paul supporters when some leaders were not. And I can say the same thing about Trump supporters, even though I supported a different candidate early on, because I believe our party needs to be bigger rather than smaller. So that's my definition of liberty, and I'm looking forward to talking more about that tonight.
Well, liberty is actually a really, really deep and entrenched premise of not only Western civilization, but our democratic capitalist system. And over the years, I've had the chance to think quite a lot about that. And when I entered into politics, I thought it was important enough that that I actually write it down so that people who were voting for me or thinking about voting for me could actually understand how I see the world and how I see them and the human condition. And so you actually can go out to my website, and I have a principles section on my website, and probably the biggest section of that is titled Ordered Liberty. And it relies on the classical liberal tradition of the West. And it starts out and it says that I believe that every person in this room, every person out there was created in the image of God. And that means that you are born relevant and of infinite value. You have creative potential, and yet you are, in fact, accountable for your actions. And that is the way that our system was designed here in America. Our founders put the lines in exactly the right place, knowing that that's the way humans were created. The line between federal, state, and local, the line between private and public. All of these things are extremely important. And in this day and age, when all of that is under assault, out in the streets, in the media, in Washington, D.C., in our political discourse, I think it's important for you to have an understanding, not just of what I think about political issues and where I will stand, but what actually guides me there. And the fundamentals of that are that I trust you. I believe in you. And I trust Minnesotans, not bigger government, for our future here in this state. Those are core convictions. And so when you're down at the Capitol and you're in the middle of a rat's nest trying to negotiate your way out of the legislative session, or what you're going to do with the budget item, or where you're going to go with health care or transportation or education, you can absolutely count on me to be grounded with you on those fundamental principles, and you can trust that my conscience and my judgment is going to emanate from what I believe in my heart of hearts and the reason why I actually even got into politics in the first place.
Thank you. So I want to learn a little bit more about you guys on a personal level, not just skip a little bit of policy. We'll get to the tough questions that you guys had mentioned may come later. So some personal questions, about 20% of the questions tonight will be, what was the last book you read? We'll start with Phillip Parrish, and we'll go down and through.
Sufferings in Africa, Captain James Riley. It's a very relevant book to this day. And, I just completely focused right on Xavier there. Sufferings in Africa. Captain James Riley. Please get out there and get a copy of it, audio, hard copy, electronic copy, and it's very relevant to today. And if you get a chance to read it, or if you have read it, you'll see why it's so relevant today. Sufferings in Africa by Captain James Riley.
Mine is a book called The Great White Fathers, which is a book about the building, I don't know if that's the right word, of Mount Rushmore, and it's a fascinating book.
Actually, the last book I read cover to cover was the biography of John Adams. Excellent read for anybody that might want to take a look at it.
We have a lot of similar answers here. I'm currently in the middle of a biography of President Nixon. It's very interesting, his rise and fall. It's the most amazing story in political history that I've ever seen. And I've read a lot of presidential biographies, but this was very, very entertaining. So unfortunately, I know how it ends.
You know, after sending you guys some topics we were going to talk about tonight, I was hoping you guys would say the state constitution. You know, we have little books in the back, so we'll make sure you give you one at the end of the night. We all have spouses. You print it off. Each of you have a spouse or a significant other? What was, why don't we start, Commissioner Johnson, what was the last movie or show or series that you sat down and watched with just you and your spouse?
I'm going to stay seated for a while here. We watched Ozark, which is a new Netflix show, which was actually pretty good.
It was Patterns of Evidence, a Netflix documentary about the Exodus.
I admit I'm a Frank Underwood kind of guy. I love House of Cards. I was shocked at the end because they said they weren't going to do season 5, but it sure does look like it to me, especially when Claire looks at the camera and says, "My turn."
Last Man Standing, but we couldn't watch it together all the time. We had to watch it together virtually. We bought the series and we watched all of the episodes. And while I was in my last set of orders, Vicki and I would I know it sounds really corny, but we'd watch it on the iPads and have the FaceTime up on our phones. And so I know it's silly, but last man standing.
Okay. You know, being involved in politics, running for office, it takes a lot of time away from your family. Being an activist, a lot of the volunteers here, you're spending a lot of time out, whether you're door knocking or lit dropping, organizing BPOUs, organizing for caucus, and, you know, campaigning. Either your family's going to be on the road with you a lot or they're not. What is the last family vacation you guys took as a family? Where did you go, and what was your greatest memory from that? Why don't we start?
So I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are just out of college and 1 who's in college, so it gets a little difficult to pull this off. The last full-blown family trip we had was a Christmas that we spent together out in Montana.
Last December for Christmas, I took my family to Miami, and I asked them before we went, I said, well, would you like to go to Disney World? No. Do you want to go to California? No. What do you want to do? Let's go on a cruise. So we went to Miami, stayed a few days there, had some great Cuban sandwiches, and good thing we went there this previous winter as opposed to now after what just happened down there. But then we went on a cruise, so we had a very good time.
It may not seem like a vacation, but Vicki and the kids were able to come and visit with me while I was in my last station in D.C., and we had been overseas for quite a while. And so the 2 youngest had not been home in the States for quite a while. So we were able to spend a great deal of time on several weekends where I was able to get some liberty, and we traveled around to a lot of historical sites. I was really excited that the kids would be more pumped up about freedom and liberty and Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and but they're 9 and 10, and it's, are we done yet? But hopefully someday they'll see those memories and they'll really get excited.
Of all places, our last family vacation was this summer to Las Vegas because we had a free place to stay. And actually, it's a fairly family-friendly place because the nearly naked ladies don't give you cards if you have kids with you on the street. And my 2 favorite memories are the rides that we went on the top of the Stratosphere, which were awesome, and the Mob Museum, which the boys actually read the stuff on the little things, which doesn't happen very often.
You didn't blow the college fund, did you? Okay.
All right. What's your favorite cocktail or beer, and do you prefer a cocktail or a beer?
Ooh, you got to start with me. I was so shocked when in 2013 when I started at the legislature, I jumped onto Senator Pappas's growler expansion bill. And that was dead in the water until somebody as conservative as opposite as Senator Pappas jumped onto a bill, and it actually moved forward. We passed it. And during that time, I learned what the craft brew industry was in Minnesota. And I went to a place called Liftbridge over in Stillwater, and they make this thing called Farm Girl, and it is a saison. That sounds a little snooty, but really what it is beer with orange peel and a little bit of coriander, and it's fantastic stuff.
Southern Comfort. Now, I know I'm a sailor boy, and you can probably imagine all kinds of stories, but here's an interesting part of the story with Southern Comfort, and it's going to make me sound like I need some help, but I really don't, honestly. I do still have my clearance. My granddaughters, they call it Grampy juice. So I thought that was a bad sign that my granddaughters start calling it Grampy juice to avoid calling it alcohol. I thought I might be in trouble here. So.
Mine is beer, and I would say anything from Excelsior Brewing.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Well, I left the alcohol behind about 30 years ago, and so I enjoy a Diet Coke while everybody else is enjoying their beers and cocktails.
Congratulations. Ron Paul or Rand Paul?
I get to start. Rand.
That's unanimous. Rand.
Okay. I thought this was a good question to kind of figure it out. So why don't we? I want to continue with this. Why? And you don't need the whole 2 minutes. I'm going to give you 2 minutes on this. Get started with you.
Rand because I've been following Rand quite a bit the last few years, and there's a lot of real core issues and core logic that he expresses that I really identify with. It's really interesting, but I think that Liberty Caucus group of us are an extremely intellectual people. Although you might not get called intellectuals on the internet, I think you're actually a lot more intellectual than you give yourselves credit for.
I said Rand because he seems to have figured out a way to expand kind of the base of where his dad was, even if the excitement isn't quite as high amongst some people. I think he had, I hate to use the term mainstreamed, but I think he's going to be able to take the movement further than Ron was able to.
Well, actually, it was a little bit tougher call for me because I remember my absolute favorite all-time political ad was the one for Ron Paul where the Department of Education was blowing up in flames in the camp. Do you remember that one?
I know which one you're talking
about. Oh, it was great. So anyway, so obviously Ron set the stage, and now Rand, I think, as these others have mentioned, taken it to another level. And I agree. I think Rand Paul, in many ways, has become, I'll say, the libertarian or the liberty conscience of our party in many ways. There are others as well. And Jeff made the comment about Ron Paul and his experience when he was at the party trying to bring the coalition together. And I remember very distinctly my very first state convention was down in Rochester. And I'm not going to disparage anybody, but we really as a party made a significant mistake shutting Ron Paul's supporters down and not allowing him in. Honestly, they didn't have the votes to win the amendments that they were trying to offer. Let them offer the amendments. Let's have the debate. Let's learn from them. Let's give them a chance to put their ideas forward. And when I became party chair, I realized that maybe the single biggest thing, outside of the finances and the operations and all the political stuff, maybe the biggest thing was trying to stitch our coalition back together and find a way to come together and actually be that coalition. And I have a ton of respect for the RLC, and this is not just a BS statement for a forum like this. I've said this a number of times. I think the RLC, even when people who were RLC officers ran against me as party chair, I think they have always conducted themselves really quite well in the grand scheme of things. They have played within the system. They have played by the rules. They have brought their ideas very strongly at times, but I've always found them to be very respectful participants. And I'm telling you, this party is so much stronger today for us collectively, starting from years ago, finally figuring out that this is a really, really, really important component of our party.
I like to be a little bit more direct, a little more blunt, and I think that's sort of one of the things I take away from Ron, is that he was more of a blunt force trauma kind of guy. Much more direct, ball peen hammer to the head when necessary. I think what I got from Rand was a much more subtle surgical knife to the throat when it was necessary. So in some ways it's the same damage, but in many respects it's a little bit different style. And I think I appreciated Rand's style a little bit more, that he was able to get the message, but using a different tone and a different approach than his father did.
Okay. Let's get into actual liberty issues now. We got a chance to know you a little bit better. Some easy, nice questions, right? Except for maybe that last one was a little tougher. So I sent you some topics on the state constitution, because as a governor, your job is to defend that, right? You're going to swear an oath to this. Article 1, Section 10 talks about, it's basically mimicking the Fourth Amendment and your right to privacy without being subject to search and seizures without a warrant. Would you be willing to sign a bill that supports digital data being included in that amendment? And do you believe that your digital data shouldn't be just taken on a government warrant and give me all T-Mobile's data? Instead, it should be with a warrant after a single specific person. We'll start with Jeff and come back around.
Yeah, the easy answer is yes. And after we talked about this, I actually went back, after you sent the material, I went back and took a look, and I saw that Senator Brandon Peterson actually had a constitutional amendment to this end, which I think is actually, if you truly want to protect privacy, you probably have to go that direction so the legislature can't flip it around. So I would happily support both.
Short answer, yes, and I agree with Jeff that it probably properly belongs in the Constitution, given that it's already the privacy issue is treated in the Constitution currently. And I remember there was legislation advanced, it might even have been by Brandon Peterson when we were in the House, trying to protect certain forms of digital transmissions. And I'm telling you, it gets really, really complicated. And when you get down to kind of parsing all of these things and figuring out exactly how to do it, it can be a challenge. And so I think having a marker post in the Constitution that sets the guideline for what it should mean, and then you figure out the details from there, I think that's our strongest protection. So I would support both legislation in advancing it and also a change to the Constitution to establish it.
Short answer, yes. And I really miss Brandon Peterson. I served with him for a couple years or 3 years in the Senate. There were times where he and I were the only 2 or 3 people that agreed on going one direction. So I think he might even ask me to be on. I didn't check to see if I was on that particular bill. But yes, there actually was an interesting amendment on the Senate floor this session that I voted no on, that I wanted to sort of highlight. I was the only one out of 67 senators and 201 total legislators that voted no on a harmless data privacy, or what was said to be a data privacy bill. Well, the problem is does anybody who know who Ron Latz is? Did anybody have a positive opinion of Senator Ron Latz? Okay, no. Well, he brought an amendment in the dark of night with no discussion, no previously submitted bill, and said this is a harmless little bill to protect your privacy. Of course, Senator Osmek's radar detector went, woo, and went to look at this. It was a backdoor net neutrality bill. So I was proud to stand up, and I have stood up and been the only one. This is the second, I think it's the second time I was the only red vote on the board, and I did it because I had to do it. We do actually have, surprisingly, state statutes that protect your data privacy within the internet. It's State Statute 325M. And we referred that, actually we've referred to Senator Latz to work with Senator Limmer to expand the definitions that are in 325M. Why? Because certainly we don't want companies selling your data, but when people start talking about Senator Osmek doesn't protect your privacy, no, I just don't trust Ron Latz at the last minute in the middle of the night on an omnibus bill slamming something in with no discussion. You expect us to work a little harder than that.
Yes, and it's a very passionate subject to me. I probably can't say a lot of what I'd love to say because I'll probably still get in trouble. But one of my contracting jobs, doing some of the same intelligence work as a contractor, I was doing some database management work. And I'm very, very troubled by what's going on with data management and the possibilities of you losing everything. And I think the Equifax issue recently is a good example of we've got some serious issues out there. There's a lot of good people out there that are trying to do some good stuff with this, and we need to get on top of it yesterday.
Thank you, guys. So that's a yes across the board, which is good. State constitution, we've talked about government grows a lot. And a lot of it, I've noticed, happens through omnibus bills, right? Everyone just throws a bunch of crap in there and it gets passed, and we have to do negotiating, and this is where backroom deals are made, and it just is a big monster of government. So Article 4, Section 17 talks about laws to embrace only one subject. How do omnibus bills get to be there, and as governor, what would you do to prevent, in my opinion, sometimes garbage like that getting passed? And who did we start with? So we start here, because we did data privacy. Yep, Keith.
So unfortunately, that constitutional provision has been interpreted by the courts, or somewhere along the line by a court, I think the Minnesota Supreme Court, to allow a single subject to be a very broad single subject, which therefore has effectively ruled that these large omnibus bills are not technically, according to the court's interpretation, in violation of the Constitution. And somebody could explain to you the details of that more. I think that you hit on it in the first place, and that is, as government grows, these omnibus bills get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, right now, we have 3 agencies focused on commerce. We have the Department of Commerce, we have the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and we have the Department of Labor and Industry. And I happen to be out looking at their budget bill in the fairly near recent past, and 96, I counted them, 96 separate jobs programs that are funded through those folks. And it reminded me of a bill that I had offered, I guess it's 6 years ago now, to actually consolidate the executive branch agencies, and so that those three agencies could come together and you could actually filter out all of those redundancies and actually start to shrink that function back to the constitutionally mandated requirement for commerce. Almost everything else we do there is not within the express limited purposes of government according to the Constitution. So I really think if you want to get at this omnibus bill, the first and biggest thing is start to shrink what's going on down there.
Well, this is one where I actually agree with Senator John Marty on, not a conservative and not a libertarian by any stretch of the imagination. He says that we should not be putting policy into government finance bills, which essentially is the same comment about single subject. If you're going to have finance and government finance bill, I think you can make the case that you can put certain divisions all together because they all have a similarity. But then we throw in policy because that's the only way you get enough votes, because everybody wants their own little policy provision, or even worse, that you want to help create a shrimp farm someplace in western Minnesota, which we're not going to talk about that. But we should be clinging more to the single subject rule. Unfortunately, in my 5 budgets that I've seen, neither side pays any attention to it, and really it's because the Supreme Court has punted and not enforced what the Constitution says, or at least that's their reading of it. And until they actually, as a co-equal branch of government, until they finally enforce it, I doubt anybody's going to pay attention to it.
Yeah, it's a very troubling trend, and it's been a trend for decades. And the fact that the level of disrespect for you, the taxpayer, in this process that gets so caught up in relativism, and you're right, this broad definition of a particular bill where you can throw in all this garbage, it's very insulting to you. And I don't have a lot to expand on it about, because for me it is that shocking and insulting.
So I've been talking about this incessantly for a few years, and a ton since I got in the race, including a couple of op-eds that are out there, one in the Pioneer Press. And we can do something. Our governor can do something about this, because it's apparently become acceptable by both parties to throw everything into what I would call garbage bills because they can't pass on their own. And so we're throwing in provisions in omnibus bills because either we know that the governor wouldn't otherwise sign them, but if you attach them to a bunch of spending, it's okay, or we know that they wouldn't pass on the House or Senate floor, but if we stick them in with a bunch of spending, it'll be okay. That's not okay. The governor can solve that problem, and I have said very clearly that I will veto any omnibus bill that does not meet the requirements of Article 4, Section 17. The courts will not enforce this, but I will as a governor. I don't care if I like what's in the bill, but that's the only way it's actually going to stop, and then you have to follow through. I will throw in one more thing, because that is part of the reason that government keeps growing. But another reason is nobody tends to know what's in these huge bills at the end of session, because it's also become okay for 2 or 3 or 4 people behind closed doors to strike all the deals in the final hours of session every year and then drop these 100-page bills in front of a bunch of bleary-eyed legislators who don't have time to read them and then expect them to vote on them. And I've also said that I will veto any bill that hasn't been posted at least 48 hours before it starts getting a hearing on the House or Senate floor, and that will at least solve that problem as well.
Following up on that topic, Article 4, Section 1 talks about passage of bills on the last day of session are prohibited. Now, after talking with you guys in the past, we know that it's not actually on the last day of session that these bills are passed. It's the second to last day of session, right? And if you passed a law that says you can't pass all these bills on the second day last day, do it on the third to last day. So as governor, what are you going to do to prevent, kind of as what Jeff talked about, all these bills getting piled on, being rammed through? I mean, I think that starts at leadership and at the top, and you know, you're going to have your speaker, you're going to have your majority leaders, but if you're the governor, setting an example, setting that leadership, what are you going to do as governor to prevent that kind of stuff from happening?
Well, it starts out in January and into late or early February, where you sit down with the legislative leaders and you say, this is my number. This is the dollar figure I'm willing to tolerate for the next general fund budget. And for me, that number is about $42 million, which is down from up to 45 to 46. I'm sorry, did I say million? Billion dollars with a B. I keep missing my billions and millions. But that's where I would start. And if they argue with me, I'd go down farther. You have to start someplace, and you have to come from a global position down to the final budget. And I think we wait way too long to make those types of decisions until the final bell is ready to strike. Also, it's very simple to say we will have all of our budget bills done 2 weeks prior to the legislative end of session. We actually have had senators that put up that bill that said you must get done by that point in time. But it does take the intestinal fortitude of a governor to make that happen, that they're not going to just play by the same old rules, and to lead in that example. So I think there's a lot of new ways that we can look at it, and also it's not the last day of legislative session that we can't pass anything is in the biennium, because we can still pass things until midnight on Monday, which is because, of course, the way we do legislature, we say that the last day of session is the first Monday following the third Saturday of May. We have to make it difficult, but you can pass it on the budget years, but it's the non-budget years where you run into issues.
Yeah, the thing is you and I in private society, we have some hard stop dates. We have our tax season, we have our budget cycles. In a school business, as an administrator, I had a budget cycle that I had to adhere to, and boy, would I get in trouble if I didn't do it. So, again, we're in this situation where we have elected officials who are representing us who have these soft, wishy-washy dates and plans, and it never seems to get accomplished. So whether it's a governor standing on top of a desk and saying, why isn't it done? Or working hand in hand with legislators, making sure that we communicate properly, making sure that people are actually thinking ahead and planning ahead. This stuff seems like simple stuff to, business people. Many of you are business people. Many of you are running businesses yourselves. These are simple things that to many of us we think. I know it can get more complex than that because there are some behind-the-scene things in legislation that a lot of us don't have experience with out in public life or in private life. But the bottom line is you need to have a leader out there setting the vision, setting the goals, setting the hard stop dates, and enforcing them. And you need to do that with a firm resolve, but you also need to do that with some effective communication. And I think that's one of those things that I think I've been very good at in the past.
So you veto the dang bills is what you do, and you make it really clear up front that you're going to do that. Because the issue isn't that it's happening on the last day of session. The issue is that it's happening without people having enough notice to know what's in the bills. And so as governor, if you make it very clear that I don't care whether I like the bill or not, if it hasn't been posted for 48 hours, I'm going to veto it, I think that solves the problem as long as you're willing to follow your own rule. Part of this is also leadership, as everyone has mentioned. We have a governor who is totally disengaged from anything that's going on in the legislature, and nobody trusts anything he says during these negotiations that they have at the end because he keeps changing his mind. So that's an important piece of it. And then I throw out there, how about pay for performance for the governor and the legislature if they can't get their job done short of a special session?
Well, I agree. I think it's leadership. And I'm going to go a little bit further and say that it's culture as well. On the leadership front, I have to tell you, I have been extremely frustrated in the 8 years that I have been involved in politics, down at the legislature and now watching it, because Republicans are never on offense with our ideas. I hung out at the state fair for 12 days, and you know what? The people of this state are starved for some actual leadership and for somebody who's willing to go out and tell them what they think and why they believe it and why it's better for them and take the charge. And every single year that I've been in the legislature watching it, we wait for the governor to come out with his budget. And then we parry on these little micro issues, and we never go out in front of the people who are starved for leadership, who are asking the politicians to step up and get the job done for them. We never go out and get them on our side. And that's why these negotiations are so horrible and so late in the session, and we end up negotiating as Republicans from a position of weakness because we don't have the people on our side. They want to be on our side. People are looking for politics to correct itself and for government to get its act together. And if we go out and pitch that, if we pitch our ideas, show them that we care about them, we're compassionate for them, we're passionate for them, we're going to fight for them, I tell you what, negotiating gets a lot easier, whether it's 3 weeks before the end of session or 3 days before the end of session. The other part of it is culture, down at the Capitol. And I was in it for 4 years, and then I was out of it for 4 years, and you go down and you just feel it. And I'm proposing term limits and a 5-year lobbying ban for any legislator or gubernatorial appointed commissioner. And I'll tell you what, that'll set a different tone. And I'll tell you what, the lobbyists aren't going to be in the negotiating room like they were for the Viking Stadium deal and like they were when the Education Minnesota president was literally sitting at the Education Finance Conference Committee table, sitting up above the legislative chambers, staring down at the Democrat speaker, getting their will. That just can't happen. We have got to send a signal that this is going to be the people's house.
Article 5, Section 1 talks about the power of taxation and legislative powers, and it talks about how the power to tax should never be contracted out or given to another authority. But we all know there are other organizations that have taxation authority, whether it's like the water boards or the Met Council. So as governor and being a leader, how are you going to enforce that part of the Constitution and lay down the law and say, hey, no, this is our responsibility as the legislature to have the power of taxation?
Again, we're in a situation where stuff like the Met Council and other programs and agencies that have been developed are way outside their scope. And these are things that we can get a handle on. These are things that the governor can make a big difference in. These are things that we can, get out back to the public with some due process and make sure people are aware of. And I think it's a matter of exposing those behaviors, and culture is a great word because it is a very sick culture that's going on. And get on top of it with some very strong leadership and getting the people back to being involved with this process.
So you're right, it's not just the Met Council, it is watershed districts all over the state of Minnesota that have appointed officials, but they have the power to levy taxes and take property through eminent domain. They're unelected and we give them this power. And for whatever reason, the legislature has agreed to this. And a couple of years ago, I was on the county board, and I went over and testified on a bill where they were going to make the watershed boards populated by elected officials, not elect them directly, but have elected officials on them, so at least there was some accountability. And the only answer to this is for a governor to take leadership and convince the legislature to make those changes. I have people ask me all the time, what's the very first thing you'll do as governor? And my answer is the first thing I'll do after I'm sworn in is go find a quiet spot with my wife to go pray for some guidance, and then I'm going to fire the Met Council and dismantle that beast once and for all, because this is very symbolic of probably the biggest problem in government. If I can't get the legislature to agree with me, and I think I can, it's actually a bipartisan issue to take away that power from the Met Council, then one other option is to say you remove all the current members of the Met Council and you don't appoint any new ones until the legislature comes around, and then there won't be a Met Council, at least for a period of time. So there are ways to do it if you're willing to stick your neck out a little bit as governor, because it is fundamentally wrong for an unelected body to be able to tax people, period.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think the Met Council is obviously the single biggest example of this abuse of taxation power in Minnesota, and I agree with these folks. And if I'm governor and Senator Osmek is still in the Senate, as soon as he gets his bill to get rid of the Met Council on my desk, it'll be signed. So I agree with that, and that is sending a serious signal to the people of Minnesota, and especially the metro and ex-urban area, that we're serious about this. But I tell you, I think even more kind of subtle, and I don't want to say maybe bigger, but certainly maybe in terms of dollars bigger, is what happens with all of these standing levy decisions that can occur without voter referendum at the school level. And I think we have to find a way to, A, put the school board elections on the even calendar years so that there's actually a little more accountability for those school board members. And I don't think we should be allowing anybody to go out and raise those levies or renew those levies, which the legislature's always trying to do. If it's a renewal of an operating levy, well, you shouldn't have to go out into referendum on it. I think you should have to go to referendum on that, and I think it should be on an even year election, not in some off year election when hardly anybody's showing up.
Well, I think at the very beginning, I made it rather clear I'm putting a bullet through the head of the Met Council. So you don't have to worry about that taxation. And Mr. Downey, the bill is in my truck. We're ready to go. When it comes to the Met Council, I want to tell you a quick story, and then I have an actually additional portion I want to talk about on this. The Met Council is downright evil, and I'll give you a story. In the city of Mound, those of you who don't know Mound, I actually was a city councilman out there for 11 years. We had a downtown where there were 2 dilapidated buildings. One was an old Ben Franklin. For those of you who are old enough, that's old. That used to be called a 5 and dime for above our generation. It was end of life. And everybody was thrilled because Walgreens came in and said, we're going to build a brand new Walgreens, no TIF, no financing from the county, from the city, from any pot of money that they can get it from. It's all privately funded. One thing they needed was they needed to move a business district over about 50 feet. Well, that included, there were 2 well, as far as I'm concerned, dilapidated, but they call them affordable housing units that had 15 apartments in it, 2 buildings of 15 in each. And we had to tear down one of them. Remember, we're keeping one of them right there because we needed the parking. Well, everybody in town was happy. City Council passed unanimously. Newspaper, our letters to the editors saying, oh my God, isn't this wonderful? We take it to our Met Council rep. She says no. Well, why? Because the governor values affordable housing and won't support this. Well, you mean everybody in my city who wants this basically gets the shaft because you're going to follow what one person wants to do? That's the problem with the Met Council. Even when a Republican's in charge, that's still a problem with the Met Council. So, an additional answer to your question, for those bodies who do not have, or who have this authority and are not elected, I believe the legislature should have to pass a bill that authorizes it either ahead of time or post or after the fact, authorizes their budget. Because if we are allowing them to not have taxation without representation, last time I think I heard something in 1776 happened with that particular subject, we should be at least accountable at the legislature after the fact to determine these agencies and did they do the right thing with your tax dollars because they're not elected.
This Met Council has been brought up a lot, and you have a bill, right? So this will be a 1 minute, actually, 1 minute answer. I will start with Senator Osmek, and we'll go around, because you have this bill, was it 280-something pages, something like that? 241 pages. So you shoot the Met Council in the face. That's your quote, not mine, because I believe in non-aggression principles as a Liberty person. What happens? So is this an overtime dismantle? Is it right away? Funding's done. Do you fire them all right away? What does Minnesota look like without a Met Council? Does it go back to just managing the water and sewage system? Paint a picture of what happens. And this is a 1 minute.
Okay, what it simply does is it takes all of their power and sends it back to either other agencies, to cities, to counties, to agencies that already exist at the state level. It takes and creates a joint powers agreement for a sewer district because, yes, folks, that's what the Met Council was created for, was to deal with sewers in the metropolitan area. A very viable and smart thing to do in the 1960s. But look where we are today. Government continues to grow. It exceeds its authority. The Met Council has done that. Why? Because legislators keep giving them more power because they ask for more power. We can't just play nice with them. We tried to adjust them and modify them in the transportation bill. The governor vetoed the bill. One of his veto messages was, I'm not going to do anything to the Metropolitan Council. No governor is going to do that. This governor will. So it unweaves, unties. I already have the person I selected that I want for the Metropolitan Council chair, and he has one job, and it's to unweave them and help me take them out. and then he's out of a job. But he's very happy to do it. He's actually the former mayor of Mound. He knows everything about this. Actually, Commissioner Johnson knows Marconis. He's been involved with government for a very long time, and he is exactly the right guy to unweave this whole unholy mess.
Yeah, there's not a lot to add here. Jeff actually made a really good point about the ability of the governor to take care of this right away. And if it is about essentially not, removing all of them and not appointing anyone until the legislature gets on track here, that's what has to be done. There's not a lot more to say. It has to be done. I'll actually tell you a very short story as to how corrupt it's gotten. After I came out in January and announced, and then had my first meeting in March, I immediately did a press release, and in that press release is a criticism of the Met Council. 24 hours later, my wife was let go from her job from American Mortgage. Say, why? Theory? Conspiracy theory? Who knows? But here's the deal. Mortgage companies, Met Council, land management, land grabs, zoning, do the math. Who's talking to who's planning out, and who's planning in the construction industry to take advantage of building projects in specific areas. And then take a look at the mortgage companies and how they relate to that. That's how sophisticated this mess has gotten.
So we have to be honest, there has to be something to replace the Met Council, because under federal law, if we want to accept certain road funds, we have to have some sort of regional authority. So the concept of a joint powers agreement to do that and to handle wastewater management makes complete sense. I actually think that's a conservative principle. But either they should be elected or their budget should go through the legislature. And I do not believe that we should change the Met Council. That will not solve the problem. We need to eliminate the Met Council and start over with a smaller body that has very, very limited powers. I would say those two things alone, legislatively created, so that they can't start growing again on their own as they have the past 25 years.
Well, this is actually a great question, because everybody will talk about their interest in cutting taxes, and you need to realize that you cannot cut taxes unless you actually reduce the size and cost of government. Those are two sides of the same coin. And I think somebody who has had experience in large bureaucracies and large organizations going from the current state, a little consulting terminology here, to a future state, the design of which you have in Senator Osmek's bill, and then building out the plan for how you get there is absolutely critical, because this stuff dies on the shelves back in the cubes in all of these bureaucracies, and they'll ride you out. They'll last longer than 4 years or 8 years, right? How many times I walked into an agency and there was a consulting report from 10 years ago about doing something, the exact same thing they were hiring us to do. So I think you need to have a serious project plan for how you get from point A to point B, and point B has to be less expensive. One of the huge risks of deconstructing a bureaucracy is that the parts are actually bigger than what the whole was. And so you got to do this in a way that it actually shrinks it and reduces the cost, and that's the value of having a plan and having a future state design that actually gets you there.
Thank you. Because I've always wondered, well, what happens when it's gone, right? Is something still going to be there to manage the sewer system? Because it's easy to say we just need to get rid of it, but I think people are going to be concerned, well, what happens next? And that's really what I wanted to get from you guys. I'm going to get to the last part of the Constitution question. Article 13, Section 7 says that there's no license required to peddle. And in the Constitution, it specifically talks about food and growing stuff on your own property and being able to sell it without needing a license from the government to do that. So how are we in this mess now that we have with all the regulations, whether it's city ordinances not allowing you to grow tomatoes and sell them to your neighbors because it hasn't been regulated yet, or farmers growing hemp, raw milk, whatever the case is, what are you as governor going to do to make sure that's enforced, and how do you think that these laws are in place to restrict this? How do you get rid of that? And we started, Jeff, yep.
So I will just say that my job description as governor is the Minnesota Constitution. And that is in the Minnesota Constitution. And we're not following it in certain parts of the state. So if the courts won't enforce what the Constitution says, and unfortunately sometimes they won't, we just saw that a few days ago where they clearly felt like they needed to enforce it, but instead they said, you guys go figure it out because we as courts don't like to meddle in the legislative process, which I guess is okay, but they need to enforce the Constitution. So you demand it as governor. So if it is something as simple as for example, maybe a licensing requirement, I think that's akin to this, start rolling them back. We have more licensing requirements, occupational licensing requirements in Minnesota than almost any state in the country. I don't remember what the number is, but it is anti-competitive. It is the people who currently run the businesses that are asking for these licensing requirements. It's not consumers. And so it's anti-competitive, and I'm getting a little off topic here, but it's the same concept that government steps in, and for the interest of somebody, they decide that we're not going to let people do something that they have a constitutional right to do. And it's the job of the governor to push that, and if necessary, push legislation to solve the problem.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to mention that I think there's maybe 2 or 3 things that are absolutely key. The first is, as you mentioned, just standing with the Constitution in these places. When a farmer wants to produce and sell raw milk on their own farm, we need to respect that and protect that. It is in our Constitution unambiguously. The second thing is this occupational licensure area. It is massive, and as unions have shrunk, the bureaucracy has relied on licensure as barriers to entry and to fencing out competition to the point where you have these ridiculous extremes of licensure for hair braiding and shoeing and all these things, right? And I want to credit Lee McGrath of the Institute for Justice for educating me on this. We had a number of bills that would require an extremely high threshold for any kind of new licensure requirement, and then mechanisms to actually take away all of these artificially imposed licensing requirements. The second thing, and this is even bigger, is rulemaking. You go out and go on the state website and look at all the rules that get propagated every year. I don't know why I did this recently. It's page after page after page of agencies and subdivisions and all these things that can issue rules. And I actually thought this might be interesting for you people. This is the booklet that governs Minnesota's, that describes Minnesota liquor laws and rules. And you can see it's literally 30-some pages long. And I highlighted the line right here. Maybe you can even see this. When we changed for Sunday sales, to allow sales on Sunday for the limited time window. Can you see that highlight? We changed one line in a 30-page document. I'm going to pass this around. You guys read this, and you will see how absurd it is, how in our business and in our face the state and federal bureaucracies are, and it all lies at rulemaking, where they have the ability to effectively pass something with almost the enforcement ability of statute in rule, and it's all over the place.
Well, I'll sort of piggyback off that particular subject because it is near and dear to my heart. I spent 5 years getting that Sunday sales laws changed, and wasn't it refreshing in July where you could actually go to a liquor store and buy a beer? I was very proud of that, and it's not just because I want to buy a beer on a Sunday and not have to drive to Wisconsin to do it. It's more the principle of the thing. Why should we be telling businesses what their business model is going to be? They should be determining that on their own. Now, as far as licensure goes, we provide a lot of blanket authority because I've lived now at the state level for 5 years, but at the city level as a city councilman, I was there for 11 years. I've done both are part-time positions. And you find out right away how much rulemaking authority you have that the legislature actually gives to you. So in order to start unweaving some of that, you're going to actually start unweaving how much power you give to cities to make determinations. Prime example, do you remember back a couple of years ago, a couple of enterprising young kids wanted to sell lemonade over by the state fair? And they got busted by St. Paul for selling lemonade? I mean, it was ludicrous. So that type of rulemaking authority has got to be held in check. And because it is in the Constitution, the problem is it's also in statutory language that we empower either cities and counties to do these types of things or other agencies. And rulemaking is a problem in Minnesota. We give more rulemaking authority every single legislative session.
Yeah, I think everybody's covering it really well. Here again is a perfect example where centralized government in this over-socialized Marxist society that's growing is so out of control. And it's a perfect example of what's so wrong. And it has to stop. It absolutely has to stop. And we need to get out there and we need to talk to practitioners, farmers, those who are actually suffering from these rules, and help us expose those issues and make sure we tear them apart, rip them up, and throw them out. So it's a big deal, and it's one of the, I would suggest, one of the primary things the Liberty Caucus can really hammer on and do a good job hammering on because it's so out of control.
Thank you, guys. We're going to get off the state constitution. Some of that stuff may be kind of boring, but I think it's pretty important as governor. Your job is to defend it, and I think the Constitution, would you agree with this statement? And you can use your little flashcards if you want, because I haven't even had you use those yet. Do you think the Constitution is in place to restrain government, not the people? There we go. Marge, those are for you. Great job. Okay. Why don't we keep those, actually, because we're going to talk about the Second Amendment here. Do you support constitutional carry? Okay. Do you support stand your ground laws? Well, that was easy. All right. You guys happy with that?
Come on, give us a tough one.
I mean, a tough one. Some of them that are tougher may go longer, so I'm probably saving them for the end. A lot of libertarians and people that are liberty-minded believe in a free and open marketplace with less government restriction. And it sounds like that's the theme that's coming from tonight. I don't know if it's just because you're here at the Republican Liberty Caucus Forum, but maybe you actually, we really do believe this stuff, which would be awesome. Do you support competing currencies, things like Bitcoin, or allowing gold and silver to be used as legal tender, exempt from taxes, because they're kind of exempt for inflation and capital gains tax? Sure.
I would say yes to one and no to the other.
Which one is yes?
I say yes to gold as legal tender. I don't think that we should be creating another currency in the form of bitcoins or other types.
Right. Yeah. The Bitcoin's throwing me a little off guard here because there's some stories I could tell you from my intelligence career that would shock the heck out of you.
Okay. Thank you for the gold and silver being used as legal tender. I mean, there's a lot of states that have actually passed legislation to do this, and I think the biggest thing is the taxes that are used on it when you're actually in commerce. Let's see, where do I want to go from here? So the Republican Liberty Caucus, we're having a bill that we're going to push this next session called tax-free tips. And the argument is that a tip is actually a gift, not a salary, not a wage. You don't sign any type of contract with an employer to receive a tip. It's actually given to you out of generosity from whoever you're serving. So the servers here may actually like this. Would you support a bill called tax-free tips that allows tips to be collected tax-free?
My going in position would be yes, but I would want to learn more. The interaction between tips and other salaried or waged employees is a very sensitive one. You start to unleash market pressures that you may not understand. I think the idea in any scenario where you are freeing people's income from taxation directionally is the right thing, but I've got my yes kind of half up here saying my instinct is to say, yeah, I'd explore it fully, but I'd want to know all the interactions.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. Do you think a tip is a gift, or is that income?
I think that's part of the hesitancy that I have. I'd want to understand that interaction, and I know as we're right now, increasing taxes and the minimum wage is going up, and service employees are really struggling. These people are struggling. They're losing their jobs to automation. Because of the wage equity of somebody earning a minimum wage and getting tips, and now they're sharing tips across the employees in the store and those kinds of things. There's some fairly complicated interactions, and I think we need to look at it carefully before we say an absolute yes and pull the trigger on something.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
And I agree with that. The devil's always in the details, but if you're talking about the concept of this, I love the concept, and the reason is the $15 minimum wage is a big loser for us as Republicans when it comes to the general public. I don't think it should be $15, and I can give you the long argument for that, but my guess is if you polled it, we'd lose on that one. And so here is a way to at least somewhat address that issue that doesn't seem quite so, cold, rich Republican sort of the perception that people have of us. So I love the idea. I think it's great.
Thank you. And you took some of my thunder because I think it does change the argument, because you keep hearing from the Democrats, oh, we need to control, we need to have minimum wage laws, we need to have the government control how much employers are forced to pay their employees. Well, we're changing flipping the script a little bit, saying we should prevent how much the government is taking out of your pockets. And I think the TIPS is a great way to do it. I think it's a fair argument. And I'll definitely send some more information for you guys so you can see some details. I have some people in the House and the Senate that are both willing to champion and sponsor it. This past year, the Republican Liberty Caucus sponsored an event called Black Guns Matter. And I've been working with Maj Toure, who's the founder. He was a rapper turned activist out of Philly. And the whole point of Black Guns Matter was to teach Second Amendment rights, firearms safety, and de-escalation training to owners of firearms. And we brought them out. We had a great packed room at the Minneapolis Hilton Hotel. Everyone was strapped, even though they banned guns on those premises. But we had, about 90 people there. Maj and I went, straight to the hood for 4 days, walking up and down the streets, handing out flyers, going on KMOJ. And, we had a room, and it was about, at least 75 people with African-American heritage, and they just loved this idea. And what I wanted to find out from you guys is I've heard you on other forums talk about what you're doing to do outreach in the urban core. What are you specifically doing as your campaign? I know you guys are focusing on delegates right now, but what do you plan on doing with your campaign to reach out to the Black community or other urban core communities? And why don't we do 2 minutes for this, and why don't we start with Osmek?
Well, the first thing we need to do is show them that we are the party that is for freedom, liberty, and opportunity. Going to them, spending at least 1 day per week in St. Paul and Minneapolis is just the start. And there's plenty of individuals that want to hear from gubernatorial candidates, but they also have to understand that we're trying to stay out of their lives. And we want them to succeed. We don't want to imprison them in a system such as the Minneapolis public school system that isn't teaching them, that is indoctrinating them, that's graduating, their graduation rates are just ridiculous, beyond comprehension. We want to be there to help their communities, and if that means providing additional police training, additional funding for police officers, the Minneapolis mayor put out her budget. She's spending millions more in dollars. She's hiring 40 more people. You know how many officers, sworn officers, she's going to include with all the trouble that Minneapolis has with downtown Minneapolis, let alone other parts? 1 officer. Their priorities are not the priorities of anyone in Minneapolis. They are the priorities of limousine liberals who they pander to, who want to check off boxes and want to continue to treat the minority communities as their bread and butter voter base. We have got to go there and peel off, and we're not going to win, but we can peel off 3 or 5% out of that area just by going there, listening to them, and coming up with new ideas that can help them. I was very proud in the legislative session that I was able to provide $350,000 to a program in Minneapolis that actually helps felons that are coming out of prison that has half the recidivism rate, which is the rate where you go back into prison, and saves us money. So I'm out of time, and I'm respectful to my colleagues so we don't go over that, but there's many different ways that we can work with those communities of color. You just have to spend the time and do it.
So here's a great opportunity for us to really succeed. I believe, from my interaction with social media, in a lot of my traveling and doing a lot of substitute teaching, I haven't been doing any substitute teaching in the Twin Cities areas, but some of that data is starting to come to the surface, and here's where the Liberty Caucus can really make a big difference. There's a lot more of you out there than what you believe, I think. I think there's a lot more going on. People are coming to this, coming to the realization we've been used, exploited, and abused for so long. Something's really wrong here. I know what we see in the media. I know we see from public, you know, allegedly popular opinion of what's going on, but let's not be cynical. Let's take this opportunity, because Liberty Caucus can really help with this. Get out there, talk to these people. There's more of you out there than you realize. And there's more people who are absolutely fed up with being treated so disrespectfully by the DFL. The DFL party left Minnesota 3 decades ago. If my grandfather were alive today, he was a DFLer to the day of his death. He would be on the Capitol right now, busting down doors with a sledgehammer, because he'd be so upset with where we're at. So you have a huge opportunity. Don't waste it. Don't be cynical. Get out there and talk to people.
So this one isn't rocket science. It is about showing up and being there. Issues are important, but every single election we hammer on education choice, saying it's going to change the Minneapolis vote, and it doesn't change the Minneapolis vote. It's about being there, because a lot of that community doesn't trust Republicans. And my last campaign, we spent the great bulk of our time in greater Minnesota, traveling all over the state every single day for 16 to 18 hours a day. But every week or so, I would spend time in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and we spent a very large, we put great effort into the Somali community in particular, and to a lesser extent in the Hispanic community, and we did a little bit better. But this is not something that you can do in one election cycle. You need to keep on doing it. And I think I am somewhat unique. I'm very unique up here when it comes to this issue, because I've been on the Hennepin County Board for 8 years now. And while I represent the western and northwestern suburbs of Hennepin County, I'm in the city most days. And the last several years, both before the last election and since, I have been spending time, particularly in North Minneapolis, meeting one-on-one or 2 or 3-on-1 with community leaders. Not self-appointed community leaders. Not the guys who get in front of the camera and actually make money off the system, who call themselves community leaders, but principals and school teachers in some of the worst schools in our state, small business people who are struggling to survive in North Minneapolis, cops, and talking to them about what are we doing wrong? Because we're spending all this money and nothing is changing. What should we be doing differently? And I think over time, as I continue to do that, it becomes harder and harder for the leaders in that community to demonize me. They may not ever vote for me, but they're not going to be campaigning in the way that they often do against Republicans, because they've seen me there for years, not just asking for votes, but actually trying to solve problems. And I think that is the key. You got to be there.
I'm actually a little bullish on this topic. We moved the state party headquarters from over at the corner of the Capitol right down into the middle of Minneapolis as a way to kind of put a flag down and say, where else but right in Minneapolis do people need conservative principles being lived out and hopefully delivered within government. And so we've spent a lot of time building the Southeast, or the Asian American affiliate, the Hispanic Republican Assembly of Minnesota, and also the Somali American affiliate. And so as compared to the Democrats who send staffers in and work it for 6 months before the election, we're doing our best to try and build organic leadership within those communities. And one of the reasons that I'm a little bullish, actually there's a couple of them. One is I am hopeful that immigration will be a little bit behind us, and people will start to realize the value for their neighborhoods and their communities when the rule of law is actually enforced. And they can see a positive trajectory now that the rule of law is being enforced. The second reason I'm a little bullish is I had the chance to be on a public access interview with a few African-American gentlemen, 2 gentlemen and 1 woman, and they were very disgruntled with their position in the Democrat Party. And what occurred to me, and I don't know why I never thought of this before, but they have seen their political participation and their measure of success as defined by how much power they have within the Democrat Party. And I told them, check us out. Your definition of political success and power should not be whether you are have some kind of authority or position in the Democrat Party. Define it by what's going on in your neighborhood. You know, I believe in you. Let's get after this. We got a great chance. We really do And I do think school choice for the Hispanic community, especially if immigration is a little bit behind us, is a great opportunity. I think the African American community writ large is looking around them and asking, where does that opportunity come from? We have a chance to go in there and not appeal to them because they fit those categories, but because they're people created in the image of God, and we believe in them as well. We pitch that positive message. I think we can do a little bit better each and every year and eventually do quite a bit better.
Thank you, guys. Just to follow up, if I was able to schedule a forum with the black community, a lot of the leaders that I met when I was there, would you be willing to go to that? All right. Well, did you guys see that? Thank you, because I think a lot, when I was out there, one, there was already a lot of prejudice against me for being white, being out there. I kept saying I'm from the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I remember a lady by the name of Sister Rosemary, and I was going on KMOJ, she's like, you can't be saying that Republican stuff, don't say that. And afterwards, I was getting feedback, how did I do, how did the conversation go? And she's like, I told that white boy not to say Republican, but I didn't want to run from that. We have to say, we're the Republican Party, and they had asked me, where have you guys been? Why hasn't the Republican Party been here? And that's why I specifically asked my question, what is your campaign going to do? So I would love to set something up and have you come out with me. We talked a little bit about immigration. Thank you. Mr. Parrish, we talked about immigration a little bit, and I want you guys to talk a little bit about sanctuary cities and immigration, because a lot of libertarians will say, I'm not opposed to free flow of people having an open border, but they may say we can have open borders, but we can't have a welfare system. You just can't have both because it's not sustainable. What are your thoughts on that analogy? And do you think immigration is good for our state? And if we're doing too much, too little, or not, or we're just okay where we're at? And I can rephrase that question for you if you need to.
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
Goodness. All right. One of the core campaign platforms for me has been, and for the team it has been and is, we're going to end our participation in the immigration relocation program. Now, that's nothing to do with a lack of compassion. In fact, just the opposite. When I'm out speaking and I'm doing some of my training requirements, I often use a training analogy that I call the lifeguard theory. And the simple truth to the discussion is you're not a lifeguard if you're dead. Okay, we are a strong, loving, compassionate, decent, really great people in the Midwest, and Minnesota is #1 on top of caring for people. But you have to ask yourself a question. At what point are you actually helping a group of people, and at what point are you actually cannibalizing your own community? So you got to stop and just put it into perspective and have a balance between compassion and kind of a really unhealthy culture that's grown over the last several decades that has led to a level of enabling, a level of lawlessness and violence and manipulation and scams that is actually hurting us. That's not compassion. That's not decency. That's not respect. So we have an opportunity to get this straight and redefine, change the narrative from this ridiculous narrative about that we're racist or a lack of compassion. No, change the narrative, stop the conversation, back it up, and start talking about the fact that we're not a lifeguard if you're dead.
So I will disagree with part of your premise when you said that at least some libertarians believe that it's okay to have an open border, but we got to address the welfare issue. I don't think it's okay to have an open border. I think it's extremely important that we don't, because we need to know who's here. We need to know the background, who's here and who's coming here. And I actually wrote an opinion piece that I think was in MinPost or some other liberal publication after a story came out that Roseville wanted to become the first sanctuary suburb. And the argument was this is going to be difficult for Minneapolis and St. Paul because they're going to lose a whole bunch of federal money under Trump. But Roseville gets almost no federal money, so there was no big deal. And my response was, well, they shouldn't get any state money either. And the interesting thing about the story, and what I pointed out was, that in the very first paragraph, it talked about how Roseville wanted to help immigrants by being a sanctuary city. And my response was, this has nothing to do with immigrants. It has to do with illegal immigrants. And we have to make sure we're making that distinction. I think most Minnesotans welcome with open arms people who come here legally and want to work beside us to achieve the American dream. But sanctuary cities don't belong in the state, and we can ban them by saying that they're not going to get state money anymore. The second half of that opinion piece was that the DFL party, while they're trying to protect illegal immigrants, are destroying the lives of legal immigrants because a lot of these legal immigrants are entrepreneurs, and they're making it impossible for them to start a small business. They are not doing anything to fix the failing schools that a lot of these immigrants' kids are going to. They just don't seem to care. And they disagree with them on many important personal and social issues as well. So I think it's really important to us to point out that we aren't against immigrants or immigration. We are against illegal immigration, and we are going to put a stop to sanctuary cities in Minnesota.
Yeah, good answers, and I don't know they have a ton to add. There was an attempt to actually statutorily get rid of sanctuary cities in Texas, and I believe a lawsuit against that law, the state actually lost in the first round. So we'll see how that plays out through the courts, whether or not there's actually some kind of a statutory legislative change that you could make to actually ban, if you will, at the state level sanctuary cities. They're violating federal law, so that's a tough interaction. But at the very least, we have local government aid and other funding streams that come from state government to sanctuary cities. And I agree with Jeff. Those all absolutely should be off the table if you're a sanctuary city. I think people, in spite of the fact that they conflate all of these issues together, if you really start focusing on supporting the rule of law and having that be the backbone of what you're doing, ultimately that's good for people. There is nothing worse for our immigrant community than for some attack or some incident to occur in their community, right? Worse for the victims, obviously, but horrible for them too. And so it may sound like we're talking tough, putting a pause on the refugee resettlement program, making sure that we enforce the rule of law with regard to illegal immigrants. But in the end, it's extremely humane, as these other guys have talked about. And I think a governor at least has the bully pulpit and the purse strings in a lot of places where we can make that happen.
Well, we don't just have sanctuary cities, we have sanctuary counties. Unfortunately, I live in a sanctuary county. That name is Hennepin County. I think it's just plain ridiculous. It is un-American. It is against the Constitution for these cities to get away with this. And somebody needs to stand up and say it. I was on the record earlier this year. The TV camera said, well, what do you think about sanctuary cities? And I said, I don't like them. I don't want them. I'll take away the money from any city who's going to do it. And the way you would do this is in the bills, the financing bills that come to you, you will have the local government aid for the cities that are non-sanctuary cities and ones that are sanctuary cities. And the governor can line out and veto. Now, that's a new and unique way of doing it, but it's a way to get the job done. We cannot stand for this. I mean, think about, you all remember what happened to President Trump when he brought up a 65 or 1960s immigration policy. He had the nerve to bring up the immigration policy that's been not one syllable changed in the last 50 years. It's as old as we are. And the first thing that came out of the mouths of the media was, oh, you must be racist. I mean, it's the most amazing thing that you are automatically a racist if you want to look at a 50-year-old policy and maybe make some modifications, such as saying if you want to be an immigrant to the United States, that maybe you should speak English. I mean, it's not our national, incidentally, I wouldn't mind making that our national language, but that's a federal level issue that we have to deal with. But the simple fact of the matter is, don't you think you should at least be able to speak the language? Because that's what Democrats take advantage of. They take advantage of these people when they come here, and they make sure that they get crummy jobs because they can't speak English and they don't have the job skills in many cases. There are immigrants that come here that have a lot of job skills. In my company, there is actually a lot that come from India and in that area that are very technical natured people that are actually making a lot of money here in Minnesota. I can only ask myself, why aren't those Minnesotan kids that are getting these jobs too? But short answer here is that we have got to start enforcing the laws that are on the books in any city that doesn't want to be part of the problem. They need to be part of our solution, and that's defunding them.
Commissioner Johnson, you know, our neighbor Wisconsin has the Foxconn. It's being touted as this great program. We're going to bring all these jobs into Wisconsin, but some libertarians will say, well, we shouldn't be privately subsidizing this. And what would you think of as a governor if someone, would you be privately subsidizing businesses that come into Minnesota? But maybe it's like Amazon or any other type of subsidies towards businesses?
No. And I think that you'll see some differences up here on this issue. And here, I hate to keep saying that I wrote an op-ed, but I wrote an op-ed on this one too. And I think that that's actually important because we can say whatever we want to Republican activists, but I'm trying to get those ideas out to the general public as well. And the op-ed was about this concept of what I call the deal policy of economic development. It's been Mark Dayton's policy. You have a business environment that is completely hostile to entrepreneurs or to expansion of businesses because of our tax policy and our regulatory policy and kind of the culture in the agencies. And then it's pockmarked by a handful of huge companies that you've convinced to come in because you give them a tax deal that no one else gets. It's patently unfair, and it's a terrible policy. It works great for politicians because you get to cut the ribbon and say you created jobs, but it's just fundamentally wrong. And we're going to see it in Minnesota now with this whole Amazon question, where at first the governor said, we're going to aggressively try to get Amazon here by apparently offering them all kinds of things that no one else gets. And then when two of our existing businesses said, no, we don't want the competition, he backed off on that. I'm glad he backed off, but he backed off for the wrong reason. It shouldn't be because we don't want more competition. It should be because the deal we offer to these huge companies is that we are a state that actually celebrates and welcomes businesses and entrepreneurs so that everybody wants to come here. So, long answer to your short question. And to say that we'll never, we're not going to do any economic development, we have to because every state does it. But you are not going to see me offering these huge tax breaks to companies that no one else in the state gets.
For me, it's pretty simple. It's public infrastructure, private investment. That's the dividing line. If you're going to put up a Foxconn complex or an Amazon headquarters, and there's going to be 50,000 new people working and living in your community, part of the job of government is to put up the infrastructure to support that. So I think that's the component where government has to play a role. But the investment needs to stay private. And I couldn't agree with Jeff more. We have dried up venture capital investment. We put this small angel investment tax credit so that really, really early stage companies actually are a little more attractive from an investment standpoint. But we don't really have any venture capital investment. It's almost entirely dried up in Minnesota. Companies that do form and then scale, they're moving to lower cost states where they can actually grow and become profitable to generate the return on investment for their investors. I have a friend who's in the contracting business, development business, and he tells me in Colorado he can produce a 40% higher return on investment for any single project there than he can here in Minnesota. Guess where he's going to do the development? And so I think we have to get after this in a serious way. It's one of the three main points of my agenda is to improve our business climate. And the flip side of that, of course, is reducing state government so that you actually can reduce regulations and the cost of government and reduce taxes. But I just want you to picture the difference between Betsy Hodges and Mark Dayton out giving the sales pitch to Amazon versus one of us giving the sales pitch to Amazon. I'm telling you, we need leadership in this state that knows how to go out and sell our state, not give away the farm, not offer a bunch of goodies to get them here and only have them leave 10 years later because the goodies have dried up. But we need somebody who can actually go out and present and pitch our state in an effective way in language that business people understand.
Haven't we learned by now to stick out of these types of situations? Anybody remember a chopsticks factory up on the Iron Range? Remember that one? Remember the motorcycle facility down, I think it was Belle Plaine? Remember that one? When are we going to realize that we make the state picks winners and losers and we always seem to pick the loser? And then when we expect a return on our investment, suddenly the investment goes belly up. I mean, it's one thing to say that we would provide some level of incentive to get the roads to match up with their new facility and get the infrastructure like sewers and water and that kind of thing to match up with their facility. But it's a whole other thing to start looking at subsidization. We never pick the winners. We always pick the losers. I don't see a way that I would be helpful in the Amazon. And matter of fact, we should be the first state to get it right, which is we're tired of being extorted by businesses. And they go from Minnesota to Colorado to Arkansas. Remember the Saturn plant that they were going to put in Minnesota? We were one of 2 finalists to get the Saturn plant. Where's the Saturn plant now? They're done. You know, we continue to make stupid decisions in Minnesota. We have one other thing that we did this legislative session. We cut off the vast majority of what was called snow bait. We were spending $10 million of your dollars to lure filming companies to come to Minnesota. And their excuse from the film companies was, oh, we bring in all kinds of revenue. No, you don't. You hire companies to cater food. Other than that, the rest of the money is leaving town because all these people are coming to Minnesota to film a movie and they're getting the hell out of here. So why don't we learn from our mistakes? And one of the biggest mistakes is picking winners and losers.
Yeah, so we're covering it again really, really well here. But listen, the word scheme and scam, have you ever thought about how those 2 words really tie together, scheme and scam? Over and over again, a great example of the fact of how these schemes have turned into scams. And every time the government gets involved in coming up with a scheme or a mandate, who's actually there ready and willing to really know how to exploit that scheme? It's the ill-intended groups, it's the ill-intended people who are actually ready to, and before the ink's dry, knows how to exploit that scheme before it even, hits the road. So all candidates have covered it very, very well. I hope that people really do follow through with that and get on top of it and expose these situations where, if you're an entrepreneur, the biggest thing that you want and you need is predictability. I need to be able to have some kind of predictability, a little bit of a risk management, and some research and predictability about where I can go with the investment. And if we just provide companies with that reassurance of a predictability, and you're not going to mess around with all kind of schemes and do the picking and losing of winners and pick a winners and losers from the centralized government, you'll give them a chance to flourish on their own. And again, it's back to the Liberty Caucus being a perfect example of that protection of our freedoms to succeed from our own labors. So, well done.
Do you support legalization of recreational marijuana use?
There she blows.
Why don't we start with you, because it's getting around this way.
I'll just give a quick, concise answer. I don't support the legalization of recreational marijuana. I do support medicinal marijuana, as long as it's doctor prescribed and pharmacy dispensed. I don't think we should have people out buying pot off of the street. And then I think the bigger thing is probably kind of in the middle, where we probably should be focused on treatment for nonviolent offenders. And I think we should have an intelligent conversation over time about the criminalization or decriminalization of it as well. And you need to involve law enforcement. We got a tough enough time out there right now with the opioid epidemic. I'm not sure we want to throw more fuel on the fire, but that's where I would stand on it.
No, I don't support recreational. I have been listening to some very good arguments. I think as governor, I think you're going to have to listen to, if that did come out of the House and the Senate, you're going to have to make a decision. And right now my position is no, but I am willing to listen to the arguments that are being made, and they're making some very good, cogent arguments. I did support medicinal cannabis on the Senate floor. And I think it was the right thing to do for very specific medical conditions. You can make that case very easily, but right now my position is no with I will listen.
So if it came to my desk from the House and the Senate and it was a clean bill and it is ready to go, I don't know as though in that issue how I could stand in the way of the House and the Senate, how I could stand in the way of the people. I don't personally agree with the use of marijuana. I have some very personal stories about that and why, plus the fact that I've always worked 2 or 3 jobs in my life to be able to survive, just put bread and milk on the table. And one of those jobs was to work for a treatment center. I worked for Fountain Lake Treatment Centers while I was teaching full-time, and then at night, believe it or not, at night I was working at Fountain Lake as an overnight direct care. So the thing is that this is a difficult issue, and there's no way that I can spend just a few short minutes telling you all the rationale. But if it came to my desk from the House and the Senate, if it came to my desk from you, the people, I don't know how I could stand in the way on that particular issue. We got bigger fish to fry.
I do not support recreational use, and you know, this was the #1 single issue that came up at the fair, and I got a lot of opportunities to hear and go back and forth, and I think there's some passionate arguments to be made, but I just don't believe that the liberty arguments for this, which I think are real, outweigh the potential problems that it causes for real people in the state. Now, having said that, a couple things. #1, I have been a leader on the county board successfully at arguing for alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. I do not believe that anybody who's minding their own business and smoking pot should be taken up a jail bed. I actually think we under-incarcerate in this state very violent offenders, and we over-incarcerate our nonviolent offenders. And I would rather have those beds for the people who are violent and are creating an actual risk for people, and I would do that as governor. The other piece, some people have mentioned medical marijuana. I ran in 2014. That was the issue in 2014. Recreational use never once came up in a public event. People would ask me privately. But in most events, the medical marijuana issue did come up because the governor was very opposed to it, and every other Republican other than Rob Farnsworth was also opposed to it, and I was actually a pretty vocal proponent. And when that bill passed 3 years ago, I said I would have signed it, but I would have pushed for something less stringent. And I still would, because I think it is too restrictive, and I think that there are some, especially with respect to chronic pain, some conditions that should be included that aren't right now. But I cannot get to the point of recreational use.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we could have a bigger, longer discussion, but due to time, I don't want to go into all of them. Because there's 2 other questions I want to ask. It's about 5 minutes till it hits 9 o'clock. I want to have 2 other questions and a closing statement. You guys okay with staying just a little over? Okay. So the environment. A lot of young people, and I think people in general, just as a former young Republican state chairman, and I guess I'm still a millennial, I think a lot of people care about the environment and they're inheriting our planet, and a lot of people are saying, you know, I don't agree with pollution. They may not always agree with all the regulations. So as a Republican, we are saying that we don't believe in science and we don't think that humans are affecting the planet negatively. Do you think that humans affect the planet in a negative impact? And what is your free market solution to protecting the environment? Senator Osmek.
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, the humans, cows, insects, everything has a negative impact on the environment. It's just a matter of, 1, what's the level of impact from each organism, and 2, what can you do about it? And when you look at what the Democrats are trying to do, which is turn a new wave of regulatory reform and unleash that on the people of Minnesota in an effort to control them, because that's really what it is. The level of impact of anything that they're currently doing is incredibly small, and it won't be measured for 20 years. Isn't that the best law in the world if you're a legislator you can come up with, is you can't measure it, and it's going to take you 20 years before you find out if you're wrong. That's how the DFL operates. They make a boogeyman, they promise you they're going to fix it, and that's 20 years later and nothing actually happened. You know, when we look at the level of pollution in just air pollution, you know, we as Minnesota, we have reduced our carbon footprint. But the nation of China and India are pumping carbon by the ton into the atmosphere. If we went completely carbon neutral or carbon zero, we're still not going to make an iota amount of difference because of what other countries are doing. So the same thing goes with the water, the buffer rules that the governor unilaterally without the legislature, just slapped in place another government fiat to take away rights, property rights of farmers. And how much are they going to actually do? What is going to be measured? We were willing to take that up in the legislature, but the governor, through his executive privilege, slammed in these rules to take away riparian rights of private property owners that are minding their own business, trying to raise crops for us to eat. So the bottom line is that are we making an impact? Of course we are. We do that every day. However, the level of impact and the level of change that we can make is so minor because we're already doing such a great job in Minnesota and the United States in general.
So I've been traveling in Minnesota quite a bit, and I've been able to interact with a lot of different people. I had a meeting with the Soybean and Corn Growers Associations here a few weeks ago, and a month and a half, 2 months ago now, I was up in the mining community. And the thing is that you have a narrative here that has been pushed in the popular media, allegedly popular media, and in a sense it's kind of corrupted the conversation to the point where you as Liberty Caucus, young people, millennials, if we get a chance to hook them up with some of these people that are very, very smart people that are working with our land resources, they will find a much different narrative. The best people to take care of our land are our stewards out there working every day in the land and in the mining. They're self-preserving. What on earth makes anyone think that these people who make their living and take care of their families want to destroy the earth or the family? I mean, just rewind it a bit and just think it through. Think about the false narrative that you've been shoved down your throats and all the millennials and all your children's throats and the engineering that's been going on in the public schools on this subject. Who's taking care of the land really? Are there mistakes? Have people made mistakes? You bet. But those people, I've talked to these leaders out there in the industries. They care. They have to care. If they don't care, they don't have a living. It's that simple.
So I would call myself a conservationist, not an environmentalist, because I think that a lot of people have become rather extreme in that movement. But I'm guessing everybody up here cares deeply about clean water in Minnesota and clean air in Minnesota and protecting the gift of resources that God has given us. I spent a week a few weeks ago in the Boundary Waters, actually with 40 teenage kids from my church. It was the best week in hell I've ever had. But that is a really important part of Minnesota. It makes us unique from almost any other state in the country. So we have to be mindful of how important that is to Minnesotans. But when you start talking about the specific issue of global or climate change, that changes a little bit. There is a consensus that the climate is changing. I think there's a consensus that humans play a role in it. There's a huge debate about how much of a role. But there's also a consensus amongst almost everybody that these plans to somehow solve global warming, whether they're huge plans like Kyoto or Paris, or tiny plans like the Hennepin County Cool County Initiative, there's a consensus that none of that will do anything. It won't actually change anything, but it will hurt the lives of real people. And, you know, I guess I'm tired of the era of us taking actions as government that hurts real people, but really does nothing other than make politicians feel good. And that's kind of where I come from when it comes to environmental issues. If there are things we can do to conserve what we have, that's important. But they better actually make a difference if people are going to have to either pay more or have a lower standard of living for them.
Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have a wonderful conservation ethic here in Minnesota, and I've wondered again since I got into politics why we aren't on offense as Republicans with a conservation agenda that's based on markets and private property. And I draw your attention, sorry to get a little plug in here, but my daughter's been out of college a couple of years, and she works for, I think, the only conservative private property and market-based conservation organization, research group in the country. It's called the Property and Environment Resource Center. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of really, really fundamentally market-based, private property-based tools and ways to get at conservation that I think we should be going on offense with. And so you'll notice if you go to my website, I talked very specifically about getting rid of buffer strips, and we should be able to open the mines and the pipelines. We can have clean industry and great jobs around this state, and we can trust our farmers as environmental stewards, and we can get the MPCA and the DNR off of these people's back to the point that they can actually flourish again. So I think it's two sides of the coin. You got to shut down this regulatory state that is kind of at the behest of really kind of unthinking and radical environmentalism, and at the same time offer a really positive vision for how we can be the champions of conservation in this state. And you know, people just got to realize, boy, the more you clamp down on folks, you push this industry, you push these things out into places where it happens dirtier. I think we've got a lot of compelling arguments that we can bring to the table and really be the champions of our true Minnesota conservation ethic.
Thank you. The Republican Liberty Caucus has something called the Liberty Compact, and I sent it to you guys ahead of time. You actually each have one on your table. And the Liberty Compact says, I pledge to the citizens of the state of Minnesota and to the American people that as their elected representative, I will work to restore liberty, not restrict it, shrink government, not expand it, reduce taxes, not raise them, abolish programs, not create them, promote the freedom and independence of citizens, not the interference of government in their lives, and observe the limited enumerated powers of our Constitution and not ignore them. Is that a pledge that you'd be willing to sign tonight before you leave? All right. And then I'm gonna ask you one question, and then we'll close because we'll wrap up, and I want to respect your guys' time. Are you a Liberty candidate? Let me start with you.
I sure think so. I mean, it's how I'm wired deep inside me in terms of what I believe about people and human nature, and why our system is designed the way it is, and the unbelievable flourishing and prosperity and the good things that have come out of this system of government. And at the root of it is, you know, created in the image of God, and we've got all of these basic fundamental liberties that are wired into us, and when you properly structure a system of government around that, really, really good things happen. And so I think you can trust me to govern very consistently along with those principles.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't think there's another way to say it. I certainly think I am.
Yes, and I think if you get out there and do a lot of reading about my social media and my web pages, you're going to find that my stance has been pretty consistent for several years. I think some of you actually remember that speech I gave in 2014, and that speech stands to this day.
Yes.
Okay. So to close, and I'm sure I didn't say prepare a closing statement, but I kept thinking to myself, how do we close this out? We talk about a lot of liberty issues. I've asked you if you support legalization of marijuana, recreational use, so you say no. You still say that you're a liberty candidate. How do us as Republican Liberty Caucus members go out and talk to other liberty-minded people and convince them to support you on caucus night? What is the pitch that you want us to make to other delegates to come out and caucus for you for caucus? Why don't we start with Senator Osmek?
Well, I think my record speaks for itself. When you look at how I have the highest legislative score for the Minnesota Taxpayers League of any active legislator, that goes to show that I protect your pocketbook, which is one of your liberties, is to keep your own money. When it comes to another organization called the Legislative Evaluation Assembly, I have one of the higher scores. I was actually, I think, the only Senate honoree last year, and they look specifically at liberty and freedom issues. So just on those two accounts, I think I certainly let my actions speak for my words. And the one thing you will see out of me as a candidate is what you are seeing tonight. I am a fighter for the values that we all believe in. I don't back down. I sometimes will be colorful. I know that I described Southwest Light Rail in colorful terms. That's because we need to break through the media organizations, and sometimes being colorful gets you through that. We've seen that happen in Washington. the thing about President Trump that I really like is he's not playing by the rules that have been assigned to him by the media and by the establishment. He's playing by new rules. We need that in St. Paul. We need someone who believes in what they say, and I appreciate the applause. But really, we need to have someone that's not going to just lay by his dish and play Minnesota nice. We need somebody that's going to fight for you as governor of Minnesota, and I think I can do the job.
Could you refocus the question again?
Sure. So, as a closing statement, saying that you consider yourself a liberty candidate, and we've talked about minimizing government, not supporting recreational use of marijuana, how do people and members of the Republican Liberty Caucus, what is the message you want us to go out and send to people to come support you on caucus night?
Right. And the reason for the refocus is that last part of that sentence. What can you do? Here again, you have a huge opportunity, and I know that I don't know a lot of you personally, but I recognize a few faces from social media. And I'm telling you what, when I got ready for tonight, I almost turned this into an intelligence product with a briefing and getting ready for going one of the worst commanders I've ever been in front of. But you aren't. You're a great bunch of commanders. And the fact is when I told you that you're a lot more intellectual than you think you are, goodness gracious, go out. Do you read each other's stuff? What on earth? You people are like, what's going on here? Why aren't you running for office? Yeah? Why aren't you out there doing this stuff? Because you've got it going on. You've just got to get out there and keep doing it. And you have an opportunity to really get out there. Now, when you get to the state convention, and if you become a delegate or if you encourage others to become a delegate, the one thing I'm going to ask of you, I'm promising to honor the endorsement process, and I believe all of us are. But I've been going around the state asking for something in return. We have got to win this. We have got to win it. When we go into that state convention, we've got to get ready to throw on the GOP jersey. And when we get through that convention and win governor, we've got to get ready to throw on the Minnesota jersey. We have to do this together. By goodness, do not come out of this state convention fractured again. We will lose. So be passionate, be out there, fight for everything you want. If you don't get everything you want, please don't run away angry. Because a lot of you are really passionate people, and if you read your posts out on social media, you know, somebody could accuse you of, I don't. I think it's great. I love it. You've been involved with my posts, and I've been involved with yours. So keep it up. Don't get angry. Get determined, and we'll be winning this thing together.
So what do you tell other Liberty members? Number one, I would ask that you have them look at my record as well, because I'm proud of that record and I stand by it. Number two, I think that if you want to win, you point out some of the things that I've talked about earlier, because if we want to win, we have to pick our strongest candidate. But I think the most important thing is to understand that the most crucial job of our candidate for governor is to share a vision for the future of Minnesota that doesn't just appeal to Republicans, but appeals to independents and non-political people as well. And so that's what I'd ask you, Sharon. So let me tell you what my vision is for Minnesota. It's a vision of a state where patients make their own health care decisions, and farmers control their own land, and entrepreneurs run their own businesses, and where that single mom in Minneapolis who just wants her little boy to go to a safe and decent school actually has the power to do that because we've given it to her and she didn't have it before. It's a state where we care more about individual people than institutions. We care more about the kid than the school. We care more about the taxpayer than the government agency, or the patient than the hospital or the insurance company. And it's a state where we have ended this bitterness and envy over income differences, and this belief that the poor are poor and the rich are rich, and all we can do is redistribute the wealth. And instead, we are celebrating people who are successful. And we are never, ever giving up on people who are poor, and we are preaching every single day a gospel that the poor can become the middle class, and the middle class can become rich, and anyone who starts with nothing can achieve anything in this state. That's my vision, and that should be our mission as Republicans. And if it is, I believe we'll win. So that's what I would ask that you share with people. I want to thank you all for being here and for everything you do, and I hope to earn your support. Thanks.
Well, the immediate question is how do liberty-minded people, the Republican Liberty Caucus, help in this cause? Let me just tell you, we need you. Our party needs you, our candidates need you, and frankly, our country needs you. When you look at the fundamental assaults on our freedoms, on Western civilization at its core, coming at us from the media and from the Antifa and all these groups that are literally out there trying to undermine who we are as America. And you look at what's happening at the schools, and it's not just in Minneapolis, it's out in the suburbs, and guess what? They're coming after you next. All across this state with that progressive leftist agenda where they are literally trying to undermine everything Western civilization was built on. That's what they're doing. Those are the stakes in this election. So I would encourage you to be engaged in a significant way. In terms of who is the candidate to support, I'm telling you, we have been describing and prescribing and complaining and explaining and giving speeches and talking about what we're going to do till we're blue in the face as Republicans, and nobody ever does it. We're watching what's happening out in Washington, D.C. right now. And I don't know who everybody else talked to at the state fair, but people are ticked. And they're watching what's going on, and they want somebody who will actually do what they say and not just talk about it anymore. I got a track record. We cut state spending at the state party 50%. We cut our debt by over 50%, and we won. I know how to go into the big bureaucracies and decommission this stuff and actually reconstruct it so that it accomplishes its mission for lower cost. I have a proposal to reduce state spending 15% in my first term. That's nothing new. I proposed that 7 years ago now in 2010 to do the same thing by 2015. 20 specific initiatives that will actually get us there. And so if you want somebody who is done with the talk and is going to actually deliver action and deliver those kind of results and go out and fight for the people of Minnesota to make it happen, I'd ask for your vote.
Well, that was that, and it wasn't so bad, right? Thank you guys very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Give these guys another round of applause. So, hey, Charity, would you mind collecting the Liberty Compacts from the candidates when they leave, obviously before they leave? I also want to let you know Harry Niska's here is running for Attorney General. If you haven't had a chance to stop by and talk to him, running as a statewide candidate, please do. And if those little marbles you got when you walked in, they're over here in the champagne glasses, wine glasses. Feel free to drop a marble, and we'll kind of let you know at the end how it turned out. Thank you guys again. Servers will come around with their tabs if you haven't already. Remember, I would probably tip cash. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good night.